It's okay. Okay, thanks for joining for this online meetup. I'm really glad to be hosting this session again for the second series. My name is Sobia Freedy, and I'm one of the members of the staff at Oxford Against Cutting. I specialise in honour-based violence and forced marriage. Before we start, there's some guidelines that we're going to be sharing. And if you feel uncomfortable at any time, you can leave. Please respect our speaker who I'll introduce in a moment. And we do have a moderator here who's just going to go through some housekeeping for you. Over to you, Casey.
Yeah, hi, I'm Casey. I'm a facilitator for body image at OAC, and yeah, I'm the moderator. So just a couple things. Please don't name anyone if you choose to talk about a harmful practice that has affected or might affect someone you know. We encourage you to get support for families affected by harmful practices, but please tell us privately if you want to talk about concern. You can do this by emailing me or anyone else you feel comfortable with in a part of the team. Important that you know that if anyone tells us anything that makes us concerned for a child or vulnerable adult, then we'll have information. If anyone is disrespectful towards anyone else in the group, then I may have to take that Zoom call. And I'm going to be taking notes today, but only key themes that are raised will be taken notes during the session. No one will be named or identified in the notes, and these notes just help us feed into future sessions for ideas and stuff. Comments made in the chat can be made to individuals only or to the whole group. There is a list in the chat that you can choose from to say who can view your messages. And yeah, as Dot mentioned, we will be recording the first part of the session, but we will stop recording for questions and discussions so people can speak freely. And yeah, I'll leave back to Sophia.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Casey. Just to say, if you've got your mic on, if you just don't mind turning it off, please. There's a bit of sound going on there. Not quite sure who it is, but that would be great. If you want to leave at any point, and if there's anything you're feeling uncomfortable about, please do. This is not, you don't have to stay for the whole session if that makes you feel uncomfortable. So just going to start off with introducing our guest speaker. I'm really pleased to have Abdelhamid here today. He's a head teacher for an independent faith school in Leicester. And he is an expert in education on Islamic and British values. He's really passionate about this subject, and we're really keen to have him. And he's going to start his conversation now. So over to you, Abdelhamid.
Lovely to meet you all, and thank you for having me. I actually ended up here because I was at a conference that was talking about FGM, and I happened to meet Dot there, and we had a lovely conversation about FGM and about honor killings and harm that comes to women in general. And for me, it's one of these topics that I feel very, very passionate about, and I believe that it's very important that we stop these kind of things and or at least speak out. And certainly somebody who has some leadership.
Okay, someone's had their mic on. I'm just going to ask you. Can somebody turn their mic off, please? That's great. Thanks very much. Sorry about that, Abdelhamid. Please carry on.
No problem. You're most welcome. Yeah, so as I was saying, that I feel it in a lot of these topics, it's very important for us to speak the truth. Sometimes the truth hurts, and I think it's very important that actually we delve a little bit deeper and find out, because many things can be attributed either to religion or culture or whatever it may be to justify killing of women or harming of women or any of these kind of things. And clearly, I don't know of any system that encourages harming of women. It generally tends to be based coming from, to use the phrase, patriarchal societies where men feel like they have ultimate power and they must force their way onto women. Today I wanted to talk mostly about violence against women and honor killings, and actually for me it's kind of odd to speak about it from an Islamic perspective, because actually Islam does not allow for honor killings or killings in general at all, other than in very, very strict circumstances. For example, if there is a murder there is the death penalty in Islam, but to prove that, there has to be obviously evidence. It has to go through a court. There is no room for vigilantism at all, not in any case. And the same thing for honor killings. So ever since I was very young, I can remember there was many stories. Even when I was at college, I remember, you know, certain girls would end up, you know, killed and then thrown in a river or something because she'd looked at a boy wrong, or she'd, you know, was speaking with somebody at the time. And these things, obviously, from an Islamic perspective, there is no justification at all. And I'll go into a little bit more detail as to how and why I can say that, because actually, when we go back to the text, when we go back to the actual from the Prophet Muhammad and verses from the Quran and the actual laws that Islam says, you'll see that actually it's not allowed in any way, shape, or form. And actually, if you scratch below the surface, you find that where did this actually come from? And if you look back in history, the way these laws have come in, actually, it's probably more linked to colonial laws within a lot of the Indian subcontinent and in African and North African states and in other areas that were under Ottoman rule. Now, where did that come from? It tended to come from there's a rule, or there are laws in the UK and in many ex-colonies that allow for crimes of passion. Now, from an Islamic perspective, crimes of passion are not allowed at all. You are not allowed to take the law into your own hands. So I was talking earlier about the fact that any sort of vigilantism is not allowed. You must go through the court system. It must be proved. And the same thing when it comes to, for example, somebody was having issues with their wife or their daughter or their sister. They thought that she was, or there were any particular indiscretions. In Islam, like the overall ending of that could be that there is the death penalty for a male or female who do an extramarital affair that includes some kind of sexual activity. But if you look at Islamic history, you'll see that actually very, very few people have ever been convicted of that crime, and there's a reason for that. Because in order to get that crime convicted, you have to have 4 male witnesses who witness penetration. So anything less than that, as a bar of evidence, is not admissible at all. And if in fact the people who would say that would then receive punishment. So if there was 3 people who actually saw penetration during, you know, sex, then that again would also not be admissible. So the fact that the bar is set so high, it's almost impossible to get a conviction. And then you start to realize, when you start looking into Islamic law, as to why that is the case. The reason is that Islam is a system that is to try to solve society's problems. Now, Islam understands, or you can say that God understands, that people will do bad things, right? People will have extramarital affairs. Young people will probably have or engage in sexual activity and the like. But for you to get that convicted, you actually have to see. You can't convict somebody on kissing or touching or any other sexual activity. You actually have to see sexual penetration. Now, I apologize for being quite explicit, but I want to explain it in a way where, you know, you can understand the laws from an Islamic perspective. But what Islam is trying to do is not make these things out in the open, that people feel that, you know, it is normal to have an extramarital affair, or it is normal to get involved in sexual activity outside of marriage. So it's about discouraging these things. In going back to kind of like the history, so if we look back at, like, you know, where people have tried to justify honor killings, if you go back to 1947, a British colony of Nigeria, so English judges actually overturned what they viewed as a backwards ruling of a local Sharia court. So a man had been sentenced to death for murder, but the British Superior Court actually pointed out that this was a crime of passion. The man had killed his wife's lover. The Sharia court, obviously being unimpressed by that, said that this obviously goes against the rulings of Islam. So killing without any without going through the proper official route is not allowed. So no one can take the law into their own hands. British court decided that the murderer did not deserve to die, and the Sharia court applying Sharia law did not. They basically didn't buy that it was a crime of passion. It doesn't work. There's no such thing as a crime of passion in Islam, and unfortunately, that has long served as a justification for honor killings. The reason being is that in many cases, these laws were then written into the statute books of many countries, such as Pakistan, or let's say Morocco, or those that were ruled by the Ottoman Empire, so Lebanon, Jordan, and by the British as well, so the UAE and some other countries. You'll notice that in the UAE, they've certainly updated their laws to not allow for crimes of passion. But that's kind of giving you a little bit of history as to where this came from, because from the Islamic perspective, there's no room for it whatsoever. And whether a girl has looked at a boy, or or even engaged in sexual activity, the parents, the community, or anyone else has absolutely no right to exact any form of punishment or anything, because there has to actually be witnesses, as I said, only to penetration. Even if they were to catch them in the act of kissing or some kind of sexual activity, there still could not be a conviction unless they saw that there was penetration, and there would have to be 4 witnesses to that.
Abdelhamid,
Unfortunately,
Abdelhamid, do you mind if I just ask a question just there? Because you're referring to women or young girls, so the same would apply to a boy or a man.
Absolutely. So there's in terms of I think a lot of the time, and unfortunately, in terms of the way that Sharia law has been used, whether it be in Afghanistan or I believe in Sudan, where it tended to be that the woman would get the punishment, but the man would get off scot-free. But actually, from Islamic law, both would have to be punished, but only if they'd reached the bar of evidence. So actually, there's no difference in terms of the law, whether it be a man or a woman that was involved in any kind of like sexual activity that comes under that part of Islamic law.
Could I also ask the question then?
Of course.
Because there's quite a lot to absorb.
Yes.
You talk about history, you talk about Sharia law, you talk about Islamic law, but what about the question when we talk about rape in Islamic law? When rape, do there need to be 4 witnesses then?
So with Islamic law, for them to be convicted of sexual activity, yes, there would need to be 4. But with this one is more, I believe in Islamic law, this one would more be punished under something, I'm trying to think of the word, banditry. So it has a different bar of evidence, because there's generally, there'll be violence. There's probably like a break-in. So actually, again, the punishment is very similar, but the bar of evidence is much, much lower. So rape, again, obviously is not allowed, not acceptable. Again, you see many crimes against women, or people forcing women to get married. And actually, this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about as well. Forcing women to get married to their rapists. And that, to me, I couldn't think of a more horrible way to live your life, knowing that the person who perpetrated sexual violence against you is now you're going to live with them for the rest of your life. So to me, it makes absolutely no sense. And again, unfortunately, within many Muslim countries, this tends to be like an attitude or a way that people will force girls to get married, whether they like it or not, to whether it be a rapist or someone that they don't like. And actually, if you look at the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, where with regards to marriage. I believe there was a girl who went to the Prophet Muhammad and said that, you know, my father has, you know, arranged for me to get married to this man. And he said, well, you know, why don't you accept it? She was like, I don't like him. I don't like this man. And he said to her, then, you know, she said, they're trying to force me. He said, if they try to force you, then they're forcing you into essentially. So no marriage is valid if the girl does not accept. It is absolutely not valid. So essentially, and this is the issue with honor killings and forced marriages, is that it tends to get attached to, or Islam or culture are used as a vehicle or a justification for these types of violence or force. And actually, when you scratch below the surface, you find out that Islam obviously does not allow extrajudicial killings at all in any circumstances. It's not allowed. And then forcing a girl to marry someone that she doesn't like, again, essentially what you're doing is you're now forcing her to commit sexual acts outside of marriage, because that marriage contract is not valid. It is only valid if both parties agree. If one of the parties disagrees, then the marriage has not happened. Whether that's the male or the female, nobody can be forced into marriage. And these things tend to get forgotten, or people will say, you know, but, you know, I, as the what's known as the wali, or the one who disposes of the affairs of either the boy or the girl, you know, they must do what I say. Now, in Islam, there is some control given to the father in terms of like marriage, but that's more to do with making sure that the person that they're getting married is a good person, and, you know, they can check and they can ask about them. But the father, mother, uncle, or anyone else has absolutely no right to force. You know, the community leader cannot force a girl to get married, cannot force a boy to get married either. And these things are very clear. So actually, what tends to happen in these cases is those girls would then, you know, end up being forced into a sexual relationship with someone that they're not married to Islamically, and then, you know, they will end up getting violence against them either by the person that they dislike, or they may end up in a relationship with someone else because they really dislike the person that they've been forced to live with, even though they're not married to them, technically from an Islamic perspective, and which is really sad. But then the violence then gets perpetrated on them, because then they end up in what is seen as an extramarital affair, when actually they were never married in the first place. Sorry, Sobia, you looked like you were about to say something.
Yeah, sorry. There's so much to say. So it's really, so for me, as a Muslim woman, the basic thing that I was taught was that if you do not consent to a marriage, it's void.
Not valid in the first place.
Yeah. So
the contract is not in place.
So I've been brought up I've been told this. It's ingrained in me as a young woman. It was. So why is this something that is not taught? It's not. To be honest, I don't quite understand why it's not as well known as it should. Because if you take the religion out of it, the basic human right is about choice and consent.
Yeah. I can tell you why, and it's probably the same as with most wars. It normally comes down to money and power and influence. And what people generally tend to do in a lot of these countries where forced marriage and gender-based violence takes place is that it's normally to do with some form of power over the woman, or some way of trying to get some money. So in some countries, for example, where like India, where there is a lot of honor killings, and a lot of the cases, it's not just limited to the Muslim community, you'll also find it among the Hindu community. There is a tradition of giving dowries that tend to be, you know, very large, and a lot of the times, you know, either the family are unable to pay these things, and then the girl ends up getting killed as a result. So I think I've got some figures here. So the United Nations UNFPA has conservatively estimated that at least 5,000 women a year globally are the victims of honor killings in India and Pakistan. and it often entails, daughters, sisters being killed for falling in love with a man without parental approval. In a 2012 UN report details how parts of Southern Africa, Southeast Asia, and hundreds of women are killed each year for being accused of witchcraft. And actually, a lot of this goes back to not just forced marriages or honor killings, but femicide in general. So there's this kind of patriarchal system that kind of makes feel like men have to mete out justice against women, and because the honor of the family has been harmed or whatever, that somehow justifies killing a woman. And as I was mentioning about dowry killings, where the murder of a wife by her husband or his family, and sometimes it can be by burning, but simply because they haven't provided a large enough dowry payment to the husband. These things have actually been outlawed in the law in India, I think in the early 90s. However, these things still go on, and these deaths still continue. In many cases, in most of the recent ones, it has generally tended to be, in the ones that we've seen in the UK, it has tended to be among Muslim families. And to answer your question, Sobio, that why are these things not taught? That's actually one of the reasons why I got into education, and why I took on this role as a head teacher in an Islamic faith school. And our girls, I have a girls' secondary school, and the girls' secondary school is from year 7 to year 11. So from 11 years old all the way up to 16 years old. And what I've tried to do, certainly in the assemblies and the Friday sermons that I like to give, is to try to empower these girls and try to empower them with knowledge. Because a lot of the time, the problem with these things is the girls have no knowledge, and then they're dragged off, and either they're circumcised without, or they're FGM is done on them, or they're married by force, or they're killed, or whatever, for these different reasons. But actually, giving them the knowledge will allow them to not only teach their parents, but also teach the future generations that actually, if you look back to what Islam says and what Islam gives you as rights as a woman, then these things shouldn't be happening. And you can have that conversation with the and in fact, when I was talking with Dot at the FGM conference, she said that a lot of the time she will speak to many imams and what have you, and they will agree with the kind of things that she'll be saying. However, not many are willing to kind of stand up and speak about these kinds of things on the pulpit of the mosque, during a Friday sermon. Now, again, you can probably trace that back to the fact that they don't want to alienate a lot of their worshippers, because essentially they're run because of the donations from their congregations. So if you start speaking about certain topics, they may feel like the worshippers might go to a different mosque or whatever. You may or may not know that actually Islamic donations and charity is probably the biggest in the entire world, and the Muslim communities tend to be extremely generous. And the money that they would give for their local mosque, or a local school, or whatever it is, charity things, they will spend big. So a lot of the time they tend to tailor their sermons to be things about be good to your neighbor, and look after your mother, make sure you pray your prayers. So it tends not to touch on these very sensitive topics. When we were talking about the FGM, sometimes people will again try to ascribe certain things to certain levels within the Islamic discourse. So in Islam, you have things that are halal and haram. So halal means that it is something that is permissible, haram is something that is impermissible. So those things are very clear. And then you have things that are recommended, and then you have things that are neither recommended or disliked. Then you have things that are disliked, then you have things that are prohibited. So there's a range of different categories as to what something can fall under. And if you look, among different communities within the Islamic world. And it's not that many, actually, when you look at it. Some of them will say that female circumcision is a sunnah. And for something to be declared a sunnah, it has to be something that either the Prophet ﷺ said must be done, or should be done, or he did it himself. And actually, I've been doing a lot of research into this. Now, I have to say here, I am only a layman. I am not an Islamic scholar. I don't have any qualifications from an Islamic perspective, but I've been doing a lot of reading as to what is used as a justification for FGM. And there is only one saying of the Prophet that I found that talks about female circumcision. But then when I dug a little bit deeper, I actually found that this saying is actually not considered authentic. So it can't be traced back to the Prophet Muhammad. Then you look at the fact that the Prophet Muhammad himself never asked for his wives or daughters to do it. You then look at, normally, it could be, in Islamic rulings, it can be God has said something, the Prophet Muhammad has said something, or his rightly guided caliphs that came after him might have said or did something. And neither is there a direct order from God, or a direct order from the Prophet, or his rightly guided caliphs. None of those people ever commanded their daughters or their wives to do female circumcision. So to me, it seems very odd for something to be elevated to the level of sunnah. For something to be elevated to the level of sunnah, which means that something recommended or commanded by the Prophet, when actually there's no evidence for that, or no evidence that I have come across. So as I did say, I am a layman, and I would love to see something more, but I've been looking at the books that are generally tended to use as justification. And it does kind of like hurt my heart when I see somebody say something against Islam that I can't see any justification for, like honor killings, for example, or FGM. If I can see that Islam hasn't called for this, the Prophet Muhammad hasn't called for this, then to me it feels like people are trying to attribute something that actually has no basis within the religion, and no basis, as a human being. And actually, I was talking with Dot as to Islam actually gives certain rights to a woman in terms of her sexual gratification. So a woman is allowed to ask for a divorce if her husband is unable to sexually satisfy her. So for me, if that is a right that is given to a woman in her marriage, then FGM, and a lot of the time the cutting that takes place actually removes a lot of the different sexual organs that will allow a woman to attain pleasure during sexual intercourse. And if those things are removed, and the excuses that tend to be given, it is to reduce the libido and to stop them from going astray before they get married. But then when women get married, again, there's a misunderstanding of how the Prophet Muhammad and the laws of Islam, they will say that I can demand sex from my wife whenever I want. But then if you're saying that removing the different parts of the female genitalia is to reduce her libido, then when she gets married, how are you now expecting her to perform sexually all the time whenever you want it? To me, it seems like a bit of an oxymoron, like you're doing one thing, but then you're demanding something else, and all of this just doesn't make sense from an Islamic perspective. So there's a maxim of la darar wa la dirar, that you do not harm and you do not cause harm to others, or you do not allow harm to be caused to others. So from this perspective, if you're causing harm, whether it be physically or psychologically, then that's something that can't possibly be allowed. So because it seems to be going against these maxims that override the call for female genital mutilation. So I know my time is running out very soon, and I'll probably leave in a few minutes.
Could I just ask there then, just for a second? So would you, as a layman, let's say, would you say that, would you agree that FGM is haram then?
And from my perspective, I can't see any justification for it. So again, one of the hadiths that I've seen that tends to be used as a justification is one where the Prophet was walking through a market, I believe, and he saw a non-Muslim lady cutting a girl. And if you read it, it says that the Prophet said to this lady, he grimaced first. So clearly he was not happy with what was happening. Then he said to her, "Don't cut too deep." And for me, that to me doesn't sound like he's saying, yes, go ahead and all people should do this. In fact, he's trying to tell, because he can't tell someone who wasn't Muslim how they should, live their life or run their own religion. So from that perspective, I don't see how you can make the jump from him grimacing and telling her not to cut too deep to making that something that is now a must for Muslim women. To me, it just doesn't make sense, because actually, if they're describing that he looked unhappy with it, then to me, it's more of a case against it rather than a case for it. So trying to look into these evidences, the more I look, the less I'm finding it as a justification. And I can't see how certainly it absolutely cannot be raised to the level of sunnah. And I can't see how anyone could say that this is a must. I genuinely can't see it.
Okay, so I will take that as you think it is haram.
Yeah, I don't. I can't give a judgment as a layman, so I can't say haram or halal. But from the evidence, I can't see how it could be justified Islamically.
Justified. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I know you have to go in a few. Have you got
in a couple of minutes?
In a couple of minutes.
I'm happy to take any questions or
I think
listen to anyone.
I'm gonna. Is it Caesar Bashir? Sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, but you
No.
had it for a while.
Yes, no, you have pronounced it right. It's Caesar Bashir. Can I just say, thank you very much, Ustaz Abdelhamid. It's really refreshing. To speak about Islam in such a positive, informative way, and kind of not to be distracted by the different, distractions within the religion. I think, you have talked earlier about one of the reasons why it was not, why people are not aware of that. There is obviously the control, there's this, and there's also the exploitation of women throughout this process. And actually in Sudan, we have something in the Sharia law, in the Sudanese Sharia law, which is, I know it's not related to Islam, something called initiation of adultery. So if a man and a woman found in a house alone, they will be slapped, they will be punished, for that. There's nothing in the religion talks about that at all. And I think the difficulty is why people are doing this. It's also the political side of things. If you have a certain government here and there, they try their best to control and exploit the people, like what happened in Sudan. And if you start to, like somebody like you, come and speak about it the way it should be spoken about, he will be considered anti-Islam and not a good Muslim altogether.
And it's very odd that's the case. Actually, my family-in-law are from Sudan, so I'm married into a Sudanese family. And I totally understand it, and it's very similar to a lot of the honor killings or these things, that because Islam is used as a justification, as Sabia will probably tell you, many Muslim girls will feel like, well, I can't say anything against it because if this is what God has said, then I have to follow it, because Islam essentially means submission, and submission to the will of God. So in a sense, you cut the girls will get pressured into feeling like, this is correct, or people will be, don't talk about this because you don't understand, and this is what God said. But actually, it's nothing to do with the religion, and it's just certain people trying to either push an agenda or try to assert their control over certain groups of people. So as I was saying at the beginning, actually, a lot of the time, it's to do with money and power. And people trying to, maintain their grip on power. And a lot of the times, women can not necessarily be subversive to certain attitudes and cultures, but if they feel that there is some kind of subversion to a particular culture, then that, you know, stick of religion or culture or whatever is used to beat them back down, to tell them, no, you can't say anything because, you know, our forefathers used to do this, or, you know, God said this, and actually not bringing any evidence to show that this is anything to do with Islam. Or unfortunately, there's a large disconnect between Islam and Muslims. Now, even myself, I couldn't say I'm a perfect Muslim. I couldn't say that, you know, I live by every single guideline. I try my best. But in many cases, I would never try to attribute something to the Prophet or God that is nothing to do with Islam. And in fact, there is, from an Islamic perspective, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that if you attribute anything to me that I did not say, then essentially you're kind of, the way if you translate it, it's almost like you've booked your place in hell. Like there's no room for you to make something up and then try to attribute it back to religion. However, we see that unfortunately this is widespread. And then, as I was saying before, that in many cases in Sudan, you saw that the woman was punished, but the man was allowed to just carry on scot-free. But that's not the Islamic way. And none of the what I was talking about in terms of the bar of evidence, none of that was ever met. The same thing with, you know, we all saw those shocking videos and pictures of, you know, women taken to a football ground in Afghanistan, and, you know, people using machine guns or whatever to gun them down. Again, there was no evidence there for them. Or, for example, and to me, I think this one is probably one of the worst, is stopping girls from education. Again, religion is used as a justification to stop girls from being educated. However, if you look at what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says and what Islam says, is that talabul ilmi faridatun ala kulli muslim, that the gaining of knowledge is compulsory on all Muslims. It is compulsory, so you must have an education. And then there are also other sayings of the Prophet that the mother is the first school of the children. So if you are raising women who are ignorant, then how on earth are you then expecting the next generations to have any decent amount of knowledge? So one of the assemblies that I did with the girls, and I was talking to them about their rights in Islam, and also the kind of hypocrisy sometimes that you see within the discourse about women. So if one of the people that tries to push this agenda of removing girls from education, if they were to bring their daughter or their wife to the hospital or to the doctor's surgery, then they would want to have a female doctor. I'm like, how on earth are you expecting girls to have access to female doctors, to gynecologists and the like, if you never allow them access to education? It makes absolutely no sense. So it kind of contravenes the rules of Islam, but yet Islam is used as the justification for that, unfortunately. I believe that's my time, and I must leave.
Okay.
People are waiting for me now, so thank you all very much for having me. Please feel free to take my details from Sobia and Dot if you would like to ask any questions or just reach out for a chat. I'm more than happy to speak to anyone. Thank you so much for having me, and I apologize for having to run off. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Abdelhamid. I think we'll
Thank you.
definitely get you to come back and speak again. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm not sure if we mentioned at the beginning, so forgive me if we didn't, that I'm sure Abdelhamid mentioned that he had to go and do Friday's prayers, and because we've gone back an hour, they're a bit earlier than the normal, so I'm sorry about that. We're going to just turn the recording off, if that's okay.
Ba-da-bum-bum-bum.